I remember the night we found a ghost at the swimming pool like it happened yesterday. It was late summer, and the air still carried the day's warmth, sticky and heavy. My best friends, Eric and Jenna, had dared me to sneak into the old Millview community pool after dark. Everyone in town whispered about the pool being haunted, but we were 17 and full of that reckless energy that makes you think you're invincible. Looking back, I wish we'd just stayed home. The pool had been abandoned for years, ever since a little boy drowned there under strange circumstances. Some said he'd been pulled under by something unseen, others claimed he'd slipped and hit his head. His name was Thomas. People still left flowers and stuffed animals by the padlocked gates, though the weeds creeping through the cracks in the concrete made it clear no one had cared for the place in a long time. "You're not scared, are you?" Eric teased as we slipped through a gap in the chain-link fence. His flashlight beam jittered across the ground, illuminating broken glass and tangled weeds. "Of course not," I lied, my voice steadier than I felt. Jenna smirked but didn't say anything. She'd always been the quiet one, letting her sharp eyes and crooked grin do the talking. The pool loomed ahead, its drained basin a yawning pit of darkness. Graffiti covered the crumbling walls, and a faint smell of mildew hung in the air. The place was dead silent, except for the occasional chirp of a cricket or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I felt the weight of the night settle over me, thick and oppressive. "Let's check out the deep end," Jenna said, her voice low. She shone her flashlight toward the diving board, its metal frame rusted and bent. The ladder creaked ominously as she climbed up, but she didn't hesitate. Jenna never did. Eric and I followed, our steps hesitant. As we stood on the edge of the diving board, staring down into the pit, a chill ran down my spine. The flashlight beams barely pierced the darkness below, but something about the way the shadows moved made my stomach twist. It felt like the pool was breathing, its emptiness alive and watching. "Did you hear that?" Eric whispered suddenly. We froze, listening. At first all I heard was the pounding of my own heart. Then, faintly, came a sound, a soft splash, as if someone had dipped their hand into water. "The pool's empty," I said, but my voice wavered. The sound came again, closer this time. Jenna's flashlight flickered, casting strange, twisting shadows across the cracked tiles. She cursed under her breath, shaking it, but the beam sputtered out completely. "Let's go," I said, already turning back toward the fence. But before we could move, something caught Eric's flashlight beam. It was a shimmer, like moonlight on water, hovering just above the deep end. "What is that?" Eric breathed, stepping closer. Jenna grabbed his arm, but he shook her off. "Seriously, look at it, it's moving." The shimmer began to coalesce, taking on a vague human shape. My throat tightened as I realized what I was seeing. A boy, no older than 10, his form translucent and wavering like heat rising off pavement. His eyes were dark pits, empty and endless, and his mouth twisted into a grimace that sent a jolt of pure terror through me. "Thomas," Jenna whispered, her voice barely audible. The boy tilted his head, as if he'd heard her. Then he opened his mouth, and a sound poured out, a guttural, keening wail that set my teeth on edge. Eric dropped his flashlight, the beam spinning wildly as it hit the ground. "Run," he said, his voice cracking. We didn't need to be told twice. We bolted for the fence, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind us, the wail grew louder, morphing into something almost human, a child's sobs, distorted and raw. I dared to glance over my shoulder and saw the boy hovering just above the edge of the pool, his dark eyes locked on us. The shadows around him writhed like living things. Eric reached the fence first, scrambling through the gap. Jenna was right behind him, but as she ducked down, her foot caught on a piece of twisted wire. She fell with a yelp, her flashlight skidding out of reach. I skidded to a stop, grabbing her arm to haul her up. That's when I felt it, a cold hand wrapping around my ankle, its grip impossibly strong. I screamed, kicking out, but the hand didn't budge. Jenna grabbed my arm, pulling with all her strength, and finally, the grip released. We tumbled through the gap in the fence, landing in a heap on the other side. Eric helped us up, his face pale and terrified. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of Jenna's car. We piled in, locking the doors, and sat there in stunned silence, our chests heaving. The night outside seemed darker than before, pressing in on us like a suffocating weight. "What the hell was that?" Eric finally said, his voice trembling. None of us had an answer. The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When I got to my room, I locked the door and shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it was filled with nightmares of dark eyes and cold hands. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, our imaginations running wild. But then I noticed the bruises on my ankle, 5 perfect finger marks that hadn't been there before. We never talked about that night again, not really. Eric moved away for college, and Jenna threw herself into her art, painting dark, eerie landscapes that reminded me of the pool. I stayed in town, unable to shake the feeling that something had followed me home. Even now, years later, I avoid the old Millview pool. Sometimes, though, when the night is quiet and the air is heavy, I think I hear the faint sound of splashing water, and a child's sobs carried on the wind. A few years after that night, I found myself walking near Millview again. It was unintentional, one of those moments where your feet betray you, leading you somewhere you don't want to go. The pool loomed ahead, its gates rusted and chained shut. The flowers and stuffed animals left by locals had dwindled, replaced by wilted stems and faded fabric. I stopped, staring through the gaps in the fence. The air seemed to thicken, a heaviness pressing against my chest. I don't know what possessed me to step closer, but I did. My fingers curled around the cold metal of the fence, and I peered into the darkness beyond. The deep end was still there, gaping like a wound in the earth. And then I saw it, the shimmer, faint but undeniable, hovering near the diving board. It wasn't just Thomas this time. Other shapes moved in the shadows, vague and indistinct. My breath caught as I realized they were watching me. Something whispered, a voice so faint I couldn't make out the words. The sound was like dry leaves rustling, brittle and eerie. I stumbled back, my heart hammering, and nearly tripped over a broken piece of the sidewalk. As I turned to leave, a chill swept over me, and I heard it again, the splash, soft and deliberate, like a taunt. I don't know why I've been drawn back to that place over the years. Maybe it's guilt, a need for closure, or simple curiosity. Each time I tell myself it'll be the last. But the pool lingers in my mind, its shadows calling to me. I've started dreaming of it too, vivid and inescapable. In my dreams, the water isn't gone. It fills the basin, dark and still, and Thomas waits at the edge, his empty eyes locked on mine. The other shapes are there too, their forms clearer each time. They whisper my name, their voices rising to a crescendo until I wake in a cold sweat. I've begun to wonder if the pool will ever let me go, or if I'm destined to become part of its story, another shadow in the deep end. The thought terrifies me, but a part of me can't look away. The pool's grip is stronger than I want to admit. And sometimes, when the nights are quiet and the air is heavy, I'm almost tempted to return and see what waits for me in the darkness.